Michigan has just had an historic national championship season. 15-0 for the first time, 1,000 wins, and of course, a national championship. We're going to take a look back and revel in the glory. Before we get to the show, I almost forgot, we are doing a live stream February 3rd to cover the Senior Bowl. Normally, we don't think a lot about the Senior Bowl, but there are no less than 7 Wolverines who are going to play it in that game and show off their skills to the NFL. We want to be there. We want to watch it. We want you to watch it with us. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Michigan Chatter on the Big Ten Team Rivalry Show. I am your host, Cliff. With me, as always, is Mac. Mac, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I would just like to ask everybody, we are on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Just as much as Michigan's had a historic season, we've had historic growth because we started at 0. So pretty much anything would have been historic growth. But so there you go. We're on the way to 1,000 subscribers. So if you want to support the channel, the best way you can do that is to go ahead and subscribe. The second best way would be to like this video. That would be super awesome. We would greatly appreciate that.
Now, let's start talking about this historic season. I want to go way back to get started. And when I say way back, I mean all the way back to 2007. 2007 should have been a national championship run, just 10 years after the 97 national championship. Instead, it marked the beginning of 13 years of decline for Michigan football. Lloyd Carr, arguably one of the most successful coaches in Michigan history, retires. And we go through the Rich Rod years, featuring Michigan's worst season in the history of the school. Brady Hoke, a Michigan man, appears to save the day and then doesn't. Hoke's first season was 11-2, and his last was 5-7. And then in 2015, we get Jim Harbaugh and 6 seasons of mixed emotions, highs and lows, and a whole lot of Jim Harbaugh repping himself. 2015, yeah. No. 2016 is the almost season, literally 4 points away from a perfect record. 4
JT
points.
Was short.
JT was short. Unfortunately, it was 5 points. Unfortunately, those 5 points were spread over 3 games, a 1-point loss to Iowa, a 3-point loss to Ohio State, and a 1-point loss to Florida State when we lost the bowl game. 2017, 18, and 19 were not great, leading to the disaster that was 2020. The Big Ten admin was a disgrace that year, but even so, Michigan itself was a disaster to the point where it looked an awful lot like Harbaugh was ducking Ohio State because the unspecified virus was used as an excuse. I personally lost hope. I didn't give up on Michigan necessarily, still a Michigan fan, but I lost hope in ever thinking that Michigan was ever going to get back to the way they were in the 70s and 80s when I watched them as a kid. And then we hit 2021. I had no expectations going into 21. I was still a fan, just not excited to be a fan. And then Michigan wins and loses to MSU and then wins. Mac and I had the privilege of attending the 2021 Michigan-Ohio State game. This win was so fantastic, so decisive, you couldn't come to any other conclusion than Michigan had changed. It really was a fantastic turn of events because we were on our feet that whole game. We were screaming that whole game. It was one of those, if they can just win this one. And at first it looked like they might actually close it out early in the fourth quarter, but they didn't. And they took it to, I think it really wasn't closed out until about 3 or 4 minutes left in the game. And it was just fantastic. I mean, we didn't even leave the stadium for a while. We just watched as just everything was pandemonium. It was just that fantastic. They won the Big Ten, but lost to Georgia in the playoff. In 2022, they beat MSU, OSU. They win the Big Ten, but they lose to TCU in the playoffs. And now we get to 2023. That Rutgers game, I remember the Rutgers game being troubling. It was 14-7 Michigan at the half, and Michigan looked unconvincing to me. You had another idea.
Basically, throughout the entire game, Michigan's defense was stepping up. Offensively, it was concerning because Michigan wasn't moving the ball as much as we were accustomed to seeing, especially in the first 2 games. The first 2 games, like despite only scoring 30 some odd points in each of those games, they weren't moving the ball against Rutgers all that well. I didn't feel panicked about it because Rutgers was undefeated at that point, and they actually had a pretty good defense, and they had a pretty good defense basically all season long. So they had some talent there, and Greg Schiano is not a bad head coach. The only issue was that Rutgers scored in the first minute of the game because Mikey Sanders still blew the coverage. He fell down on the man-to-man coverage there. Yep. That kind of sucked. But what's really interesting is, thank you to the Detroit Free Press for this. This is an amazing read if you pick this up. They mentioned that Sanders still went over to the sideline, told the defense, hey, guys, I'm going to get that one back. And he had a pick six in the third quarter, I think it was, either third or fourth quarter. And it was the third quarter. And that was basically the end of the game right there. Michigan went up by 3 scores, and that was it.
That was it. Week after that, we get to Nebraska. Nebraska was a sigh of relief because Michigan dominated that entire game.
From start to finish. There really wasn't, I mean, and I felt bad for Nebraska a little bit too, because I know they were really excited to see Matt Rule come in there for year one. It's year one though. They're in the midst of a rebuilding year. That's fine. And Michigan was out on their destiny trip. I don't really know. But what was really impressive about this game was specifically the athleticism of JJ McCarthy was on display. He had a couple of passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown. Also, Kalel Mullings had a touchdown, and I just love that guy. He's such a dude.
Yep.
So yeah, that was a great game.
And it ended 45-7 Michigan, so that's always a bonus.
Yes.
The Minnesota game. This is where things start to get interesting because after this game is when PJ Fleck talks about Michigan practically being an NFL team and just they start to crush you at the beginning and they don't let up until the game is over. And then, so go ahead, Mac. What did you see there?
Well, and I was just going to say I was live tweeting this game and watching some of the tweets come in from Ohio State fans. It was kind of funny because they were saying, "Oh, it's how does Minnesota break double digits on Michigan and we're only in the first half?" It was 24-10 at the end of the first half. I'm like, I don't care. They've got 10 points.
Right.
Shut up.
And the final score was 52-10.
52-10. This was utter domination from start to finish, and 2 of their touchdowns came from the defense. So just stop.
It was that slow build that Michigan had for every single game. They didn't. Yes. It wasn't a spectacular shutdown. It was just that slow build through the whole thing.
Right.
Then we've got Indiana, Michigan State, and Purdue. 3 weeks of just utter domination. And this is when after the Indiana game is when the sign stealing scandal broke. And Michigan State was told, hey, we're pretty sure that Michigan is stealing all of your signs. And Michigan State actually released a statement that they might not play the game because they were worried about the safety of their players. But apparently not that much because they went ahead with the game anyway.
Well, honestly, even if Michigan hadn't been stealing signs, which again, sign stealing is legal, kids. But even if Michigan hadn't been stealing signs, Michigan State probably should have forfeited because either way, their players were in danger with this one.
Right.
Yeah.
Then, because of that whole sign stealing thing, we have Harbaugh is suspended again going into the Penn State game. Penn State is now number 10, and this is the most challenging game Michigan was expecting. It's the most challenging game at this point that Michigan walks into. It's their first ranked opponent. And again, like I said, Jim Harbaugh is not there, but Sharon Moore is the acting head coach. And again, it was a slow build. This was at Penn State. And Mac, take it from there.
Well, Penn State was coming into this game. A lot of people were saying Michigan's probably not going to beat Penn State. What's probably going to happen is they're going to lose to Penn State, but then beat Ohio State, and there's going to be a 3-way tie for the Big Ten East.
Right.
Penn State coming into that game, I mean, people were saying, oh, the offense might have been a little bit shaky, but at that point, they hadn't had a single game where they scored less than 30 points, except for Ohio State, where they scored 12, but Ohio State obviously had a really good defense, so it made sense. It did. But Michigan, it doesn't matter. They said they couldn't run the ball on Penn State. They could. They ran it 32 straight times in the second half to basically run the clock out and played the most conservative game possible and still beat them.
And that was the game where they had basically 8 passing plays.
Yeah, they completed. JJ McCarthy went 7 for 8 for 60 yards.
Right. And then people were saying, oh, see, JJ can't pass. And we're like,
Yeah,
but they
JJ,
beat them on the ground. They didn't have to.
they didn't have to throw the ball. Sharon Moore didn't know he was going to be the coach until like the hour before the game, guys. Like,
Right. Stepping over to Maryland, and this is Michigan's 1000th win. But before we get to that, Maryland actually gave Michigan a fit. It turned out to be a fairly tough game.
yes. Yeah. I mean, Maryland, and Maryland was interesting because up to this point, I mean, they weren't a bad team. And I still don't think that they were a bad team. I know Talia had some issues with turnovers. He's always had issues with turnovers, but he's going to he ends the season as the Big Ten's most productive quarterback ever, I believe, is what he got. Yeah, I mean, Michigan was cruising to a 16-3 lead at the end of the first quarter and then goes up 23-3 at that point. You kind of think the players are getting a little bit like, all right, we've got this. The game is over. We can start prepping for Ohio State. Not so fast. Shout out Lee Corso. Right before the end of the half, Maryland answers with a touchdown and then also stops a Michigan drive with a rare J.J. McCarthy interception, his last interception of the season, actually, and then goes on to score in the opening drive of the third quarter. So, yeah, it looked like a game there, but then Michigan's defense just stepped up with a couple of huge turnovers to end the game.
Yep.
Oh, and two safeties. Two safeties.
And that game ends 31-24, one of Michigan's tightest games of the season. Then we start looking at Ohio State. Michigan has already beaten Ohio State 2 years in a row. This game was like the Ohio State-Michigan games I remember from the 70s and 80s. It was intense. It was hard-hitting. It was grinded-out football. But Michigan never actually lost the lead. And what's interesting about that is there were so many people that even up to this point, people are saying, oh, Michigan hasn't faced a tough opponent. Ohio State is number 2. Michigan's number 3. They're probably not going to win because they're just not at that level yet.
And I mean, what can you say? Like, the excuses every single week just kept changing. Like it started, oh, you only win because of the sign stealing. Oh, you only beat Penn State because their offense is historically bad. No, it wasn't. Okay. Oh, you only beat or you almost lost to Maryland. Like that means you're definitely going to lose to Ohio State. Okay, sure. Whatever, guys. Ohio State ran their quarterback out of the state after putting up 271 yards and 2 touchdowns. I understand that he had 2 costly interceptions that, one ended the game and the other led to Michigan's first score. But guys, if you had anything resembling an offensive line, you probably would have won, actually, to be totally honest.
And then we get to the Big Ten championship, Michigan's 3rd Big Ten championship. We all kind of expected Michigan to win because Iowa and the entire West Division just isn't on the same level. But it started out, again, unspectacular and ends in a shutout.
Yeah, I mean, the game was 10-0 at half. I remember we were at that hotel at Soaring Eagle Casino in Mount Pleasant, which is neither a mount nor is it pleasant. And we were bored, honestly. I think we were actually just having casual conversation throughout the game, but it ended and we were like, oh, sweet, 3 in a row. All right.
Then we get to the Rose Bowl. Michigan faces Alabama in the Rose Bowl, our nemesis for how many years now, even though I think Michigan actually is leading in this series, but Alabama is Alabama. And we were nervous. I mean, I was still like, okay, this is a real test. I don't know if Michigan's going to do this. It's their toughest game of the season. It's their first overtime of the season. Michigan's first playoff win and their first Rose Bowl since 1998. And that game was just flat out fantastic. I don't know. It was just so amazing to watch Michigan play at that level. To see them, they didn't dominate. I don't want to say that was a domination because they actually lost the lead. And I was like, uh-oh, we're done. I don't know if Michigan's going to recover from this, but they did.
Yeah, so ESPN's FPI had Alabama with an 89% chance of winning with 4 minutes and 35 seconds left in the fourth quarter. Alabama was up 20-13.
Yeah.
Michigan teams of the past would have lost this game. And that drive that J.J. McCarthy, Roman Wilson, Blake Corum, the 4th and 1 conversion to Blake Corum, which was a freaking passing play, man, That should, in my book, go down as probably the greatest singular drive of offensive football in Michigan history. Backs against the wall, didn't have the lead. Alabama with all of the momentum to come back and score and take it to OT and then win is just crazy. And then to see the GOAT of college football out the door. Love Nick Saban.
Yep.
Love that Michigan retired him. That's just amazing to me.
Yep. And then, okay, now we're at the national championship. And the worst part about this was I was sick. I mean, actually sick, not like sick to death, but I mean, I like had a cold. So I'm watching this game from the couch, just kind of like, Michigan struggled. But then in that fourth quarter, Washington couldn't even score. Mike Sanders and the Michigan defense play the game of their lives, but they don't break. Mac, you were not sick. How did you feel about that game?
I was getting over being sick, so I was tired. But that did not stop me from jumping up and down with every score, every turnover. It didn't matter. Michigan lost the momentum many times in this game, and Washington had every opportunity, had several opportunities to take it away from Michigan, and honestly probably should have, if it weren't for the amazingly stout defense that Michigan boasts every single year. That D-line forced Michael Penix into so many bad throws that Michael Penix was not used to having to make. That 4th and 3 play, I think it was, where he drops back to pass and throws the interception to Mikey Sanders still. I don't know why you're throwing the ball there. You probably should have ran it, but whatever, you did that and you threw the interception and the game is over at that point. That was just a clutch play for Michigan to come up with there.
Yeah, just absolutely fantastic. And then Kalen DeBoer ends up leaving Washington for Alabama. That's the 2023 season. Just, I don't know, just so fantastic. It was so great to be a part of it, to watch it, to have that fun through the whole season where you really didn't know from game to game if Michigan was going to keep winning, and they do. And that's what makes it exciting. It's those games where the team just dominates and dominates and dominates. I mean, yeah, that's cool, but it's more exciting to be on the edge of your seat watching these games. And that's the way I felt all season. And to see Michigan get to that national championship and win, go blue, man. That just fantastic. Mac, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, those teams that dominate week in and week out, like Georgia, they win all of these amazing games and stuff like that. But as soon as they hit a team with anything resembling heart and soul and passion, you at that point, when the chips are down, what are you going to be able to do? And Georgia loses to Alabama, and that's why Alabama gets in the CFP over them. Controversial, I know, because of the Florida State thing, but that's just what happened. Mm-hmm. To watch Michigan and Alabama play, two very passionate schools, two incredible coaches with two very, very good rosters, to watch those two teams play in the granddaddy of them all was probably the best game of college football to happen this year, possibly in a few years, which is just amazing. And to top it off with a natty on top of that, best season of Michigan football ever.
That's going to do it for us. I hope you guys enjoyed this season. We've got more football coming up. Looking forward to 2024. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your memories. Share anything you want about this season in the comments. We'd love to hear it. And I think that's going to do it for us. Mac, take us out.
This is National Championship Chatter on the Big Ten Team Rivalry Show.
Go Blue.
Go Blue.